Welcome to our regular podcast about REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, the great therapy that Albert Ellis devised, which says that our emotions come from our thinking, not from situations, and a particular kind of thinking in terms of demands, must, shoulds, supposed tos, have tos, demands and global evaluations, such as I must do well and get approval, or else I'm no good. You must treat me well, or else you're no good. And life must go well, or else life is no good. So if you have emotional disturbance, anxiety, depression, or anger, look for your must, look for your should, and uproot it. Today, I also wanted to mention that my partner, Mick Berry, will be here. He suggested today's topics. And Chris Rossini, our tech engineer, is always here. If we're here, Chris is here. So want to thank Chris also for his technical help. So let's begin. The first topic you suggested, Mick, was why there are no better therapies than REBT. How would you back that up?
Well, okay, I'd first back it up by saying I can't think of any. All right. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't any, but I will say I can't think of any. Now, the reason I can't think of any is because REBT dissects the way human beings think and the way human beings disturb themselves. And that is universal, human being to human being, all 7 or 8 billion of us, how many there are and how many have ever lived. We disturb ourselves in uncannily similar ways. And that's by making demands upon ourselves, other people, or the world. And so because of that, I don't see how anything could improve upon that.
Okay, let me play the skeptic in that. And that is, if we're talking about better therapies, meaning to help people, if someone doesn't apply the therapy, then it's not going to help them. And some people will go for psychoanalytic Freudian treatment, and as a result of more of a placebo effect, they may get better because they think this makes a lot of sense. This will help me with my anxiety, and then they no longer upset themselves as much as they used to. So for those kind of people, in terms of helping them, if they have a different view, they don't like REBT or cognitive behavior therapy, then that will work better. So in that sense, it would be a better therapy for them if the goal is to minimize their anxiety, depression, or anger.
Okay, my response to that would be, yes, it could be a much better therapy for them, but the way you describe it, what they're talking about is a delusional therapy. Now, I'm not talking about a delusional therapy, I'm talking about in actuality. If somebody wants to engage in something to benefit from a placebo effect, and if that placebo effect is effective and works for them, I say have at it, go ahead and do it. But I'm not talking about a placebo effect. I'm talking about describing and viewing things in terms of reality and not a delusion.
And what do you mean by a delusion?
Well, what is a placebo? You said a placebo effect, and that would be somebody believes something that will work, and so then it works simply because they believe it. But by a delusion, I mean if that person would have scrutiny put to their viewpoints, I think that they're helping the way that they're looking at themselves and what would be helping would fall apart. And I see this time and time again. And usually what happens when, in fact, I would say I've never seen it not happen, when somebody has a way of looking at something that helps them, but it isn't very sound, they allow no criticism, no critique, no skepticism, no evaluation of their viewpoint. And they also end up doing things that are very destructive to other people in terms of defending themselves. They will not allow any challenge to their viewpoint.
Okay, very well said, very passionately said. I love your passion, Nick. And then what's that?
I've got it.
Yeah, then you said why all effective therapies are actually REBT. How could you support that?
Well, let's say somebody's doing analysis, okay, and they conclude, well, I've now gotten in touch with the root of my problem, which is that my parents treated me terribly when I was a child. Now that I've gotten to the root of it, I can then accept myself and accept the world. What they're simply doing is finding a way to accept themselves or accept the world. They're not getting away from REBT. They're still changing their thinking. REBT is changing thinking. Any therapy that works changes thinking. REBT is about coming up with self-helping thinking rather than self-defeating thinking. Therefore, any therapy that gives you self-helping thinking rather than self-defeating thinking is REBT.
I think you have a profession cut out for you, and that is profession, an REBT therapist.
Thanks.
And so in other words, what you're saying, Mick, is the bottom line of REBT and of emotional health is unconditional acceptance, unconditionally accepting yourself, others, and the world. And that doesn't mean thinking everything's rosy, but realizing you have your faults, other people have their faults, life has its problems, but that doesn't mean it's awful, terrible, or horrible.
Right. And people in situations such as my father in World War II flew on an airplane to go bomb the war machinery of Germany, and they weren't depressed. They were very frightened. He admitted to being frightened. They admitted to a lot of anxiety, but they still got the job done. Now, many people were killed, and they knew that that was a danger. But even under circumstances that I consider to be about the worst I could imagine, they still were not mentally disturbed to the point that they could not perform the job presented for them that they knew they had best do.
And your point with that is what?
That it's the way we think that causes us to be disturbed, not our circumstances. Even under the most adverse circumstances, people still manage to think in self-helping rather than self-defeating ways.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Very good. And your final point was why there is no other choice for mental health than REBT. And I think what you mean is why there is no other really effective depth choice than REBT. Obviously, there are a lot of choices. I think there are about 200 other therapies out there. So there are no other good choices for mental health or effective choices. Is that right?
Well, and I would say what I mean by REBT, there is no better effective choice for mental health than recognizing your disturbing thoughts, recognizing your demands, eliminating your demands, keeping your desire, but not turning it into a demand. That is the dynamic of what happens when we feel okay, when we feel maybe not even good, but when we feel like we are capable of coping with a particular situation, no matter how difficult or simple it may be.
Okay, excellent.
If you want to, I should say how difficult or easy it may be.
Yes. If you want to learn more about this sterling approach to therapy, REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, Google Albert Ellis, the founder of this approach, ELLIS, or my book, 3-Minute Therapy, or previous podcasts we've done, 3-Minute Therapy podcast. I also have some Psychology Today blogs that you could look up, and my moniker there is the 3-Minute Therapist. Yes, Mick?
I just wanted to say, I know I'm making very bold statements here and people may challenge them, and that's very good. I would like a challenge to be in the form of a conversation and not simply some response somebody writes and will not engage with me in letting me tell them my response. And I'll even welcome phone conversations. But one thing that happens now that's non-productive is people just say things on the internet and will have nothing else to do. But I want a conversation. If my ideas are assumed to be wrong, I would like to talk with the individual about it so that we may discuss it. Because if they're wrong, prove me wrong.
Okay, thank you for that challenge, Mick. And thank you, Chris Rossini, our tech engineer, for holding this all together. Comment below if you'd like to engage with us or Mick about this. Give us a thumbs up if you like this. Suggest subjects for future podcasts. Volunteer. We're always looking for a guest to discuss problems with. Their view could be a similar view or an opposite view. And donate to Patreon to help support us, and subscribe to the 3 Minute Therapy podcast to stay on the rational side of life.